Indeed, if Harry Warrington had a passion for military pursuits and studies, there was enough of war stirring in Europe, and enough talk in all societies which he frequented in London, to excite and inflame him. Though our own gracious Prince of the House of Hanover had been beaten, the Protestant hero, the King of Prussia, was filling the world with his glory, and winning those astonishing victories in which I deem it fortunate on my own account that my poor Harry took no part, for then his voracious biographer would have had to narrate battles the description whereof has been undertaken by another pen. I am glad, I say, that Harry Warrington was not at Rossbach on that famous gunpowder fete day, on the 5th of November, in the year 1757, nor at that tremendous slaughtering match of Leuthen, which the Prussian king played a month afterwards, for these prodigious actions will presently be narrated in other volumes, which I and all the world are eager to behold. Would you have this history compete with yonder book? Could my jaunty, yellow park phaeton run counter to that grim chariot of thundering war? Could my meek little jog-trot Pegasus meet the shock of yon steed of foaming bit and flaming nostril? Dear, kind reader, with whom I love to talk from time to time, stepping down from the stage where our figures are performing, attired in the habits and using the parlance of past ages, my kind, patient reader. It is a mercy for both of us that Harry Warrington did not follow the King of the Borussians, as he was minded to do, for then I should have had to describe battles which Carlyle is going to paint, and I don't wish you should make odious comparisons between me and that master. Harry Warrington not only did not join the King of the Borussians, but he pined and chafed at not going. He led a sulky, useless life, that is the fact. He dangled about the military coffee-houses. He did not care for reading anything save a newspaper. His turn was not literary. He even thought novels were stupid, and, as for the ladies crying their eyes out over Mr. Richardson, he could not imagine how they could be moved by any such nonsense. He used to laugh in a very hearty jolly way, but a little late, and some time after the joke was over. Pray, why should all gentlemen have a literary turn? And do we like some of our friends the worse because they never turned a couplet in their lives? Ruined, perforce idle, dependent on his brother for supplies, if he read a book falling asleep over it, with no fitting work for his great strong hands to do, how lucky it is that he did not get into more trouble. Why, in the case of Achilles himself, when he was sent by his mamma to the court of King What d'ye call em in order to be put out of harm's reach, what happened to him amongst a parcel of women with whom he was made to idle his life away? And how did Pyrrhus come into the world? A powerful meddlesome young Achilles ought not to be leading string by women too much, is out of his place dawdling by distaffs or handing coffee cups, and when he is not fighting, depend on it, is likely to fall into much worse mischief. Those soft-hearted women, the two elder ladies of the Lambert family, with whom he mainly consorted, had an untiring pity and kindness for Harry, such as women only, and only a few of those, can give. If a man is in grief, who cheers him; in trouble, who consoles him; in wrath, who soothes him; in joy, who makes him doubly happy; in prosperity, who rejoices; in disgrace, who backs him against the world, and dresses with gentle unguents and warm poultices the rankling wounds made by the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Who but woman, if you please? You who are ill and sore from the buffets of fate, have you one or two of these sweet physicians? Return thanks to the gods that they have left you so much of consolation. What gentleman is not more or less a Prometheus? Who has not his rock, his chain, and his liver in a deuce of a condition? But the sea nymphs come, the gentle, the sympathizing, they kiss our writhing feet, they moisten our parched lips with their tears, they do their blessed best to console us Titans, they don't turn their backs upon us after our overthrow. Now Theo and her mother were full of pity for Harry, but Hetty's heart was rather hard and seemingly savage towards him. She chafed that his position was not more glorious, she was angry that he was still dependent and idle. The whole world was in arms, and could he not carry a musket? It was harvest time, and hundreds of thousands of reapers were out with their flashing sickles, could he not use his, and cut down his sheaf or two of glory? Why, how savage the little thing is with him, says Papa, after a scene in which, according to her wont, Miss Hetty had been firing little shots into that quivering target which came and set itself up in Mrs. Lambert's drawing-room every day. "Her conduct is perfectly abominable," cries Mama. "She deserves to be whipped and sent to bed." "Perhaps, Mother, it is because she likes him better than any of us do," says Theo, "and it is for his sake that Hetty is angry. If I were fond of someone, I should like to be able to admire and respect him always, to think everything he did right, and my gentleman better than all the gentlemen in the world." "The truth is, my dear," answers Mrs. Lambert, "that your father is so much better than all the world, he has spoiled us. Did you ever see anyone to compare with him?" "Very few, indeed," owns Theo, with a blush. "Very few. Who is so good-tempered?" "I think nobody, Mama," Theo acknowledges. "Or so brave?" "Why, I dare say Mr. Wolfe, or Harry, or Mr. George, are very brave." "Or so learned and witty?" "I am sure Mr. George seems very learned, and witty too, in his way," says Theo, "and his manners are very fine, you own they are. Madame de Bernstein says they are, and she hath seen the world. Indeed, Mr. George has a lofty way with him, which I don't see in other people, and, in reading books, I find he chooses the fine noble things always, and loves them in spite of all his satire. He certainly is of a satirical turn, but then he is only bitter against mean things and people. No gentleman hath a more tender heart, I am sure, and but yesterday, after he had been talking so bitterly as you said, I happened to look out of window, and saw him stop and treat a whole crowd of little children to apples at the stall at the corner. And the day before yesterday, when he was coming and brought me the Molière, he stopped and gave money to a beggar, and how charmingly, sure, he reads the French. I agree with him though about Tartuffe, though 'tis so wonderfully clever and lively, that a mere villain and hypocrite is a figure too mean to be made the chief of a great piece. Iago, Mr. George said, is near as great a villain, but then he is not the first character of the tragedy, which is Othello, with his noble weakness. But what fine ladies and gentlemen Molière represents, so Mr. George thinks, but oh, I don't dare to repeat the verses after him." "But you know them by heart, my dear?" asks Mrs. Lambert. And Theo replies, "Oh yes, Mama. I know them by." "Nonsense. I hear fancy osculations, palpitations, and exit Miss Theo, blushing like a rose." Why had she stopped in her sentence? Because Mama was looking at her so oddly. And why was Mama looking at her so oddly? And why had she looked after Mr. George when he was going away, and looked for him when he was coming? Ah, and why do cheeks blush, and why do roses bloom? Old time is still a-flying. Old spring and bud time, old summer and bloom time, old autumn and seed time, old winter time, when the cracking, shivering old treetops are bald or covered with snow. A few minutes after George arrived, Theo would come downstairs with a fluttering heart, maybe, and a sweet nosegay in her cheeks, just culled, as it were, fresh in his honor, and I suppose she must have been constantly at that window which commanded the street, and whence she could espy his generosity to the sweep, or his purchases from the apple-woman. But if it was Harry who knocked, she remained in her own apartment with her work or her books, sending her sister to receive the young gentleman, or her brothers when the elder was at home from college, or Dr. Cruges from the Chartreux gave the younger leave to go home. And what good eyes Theo must have had, and often in the evening, too, to note the difference between Harry's yellow hair and George's dark locks, and between their figures, though they were so like that people continually were mistaking one for the other brother. Now it is certain that Theo never mistook one or t'other, and that Hetty, for her part, was not in the least excited, or rude, or pert, when she found the black-haired gentleman in her mother's drawing-room. Our friends could come when they liked to Mr. Lambert's house, and stay as long as they chose, and, one day, he of the golden locks was sitting on a couch there, in an attitude of more than ordinary idleness and despondency, when who should come down to him but Miss Hetty? I say it was a most curious thing, though the girls would have gone to the rack rather than own any collusion, that when Harry called, Hetty appeared, when George arrived, Theo somehow came, and so, according to the usual dispensation, it was Miss Lambert, Jr., who now arrived to entertain the younger Virginian. After usual ceremonies and compliments, we may imagine that the lady says to the gentleman, "And pray, sir, what makes your honor look so glum this morning?" "Ah, Hetty," says he, "I have nothing else to do but to look glum. I remember when we were boys, and I a rare idle one, you may be sure, I would always be asking my tutor for a holiday, which I would pass very likely swinging on a gate, or making ducks and drakes over the pond, and those do-nothing days were always the most melancholy. What have I got to do now from morning till night? Breakfast, walk, dinner, walk, tea, supper, I suppose, and a pipe of your Virginia," says Miss Hetty, tossing her head. "I tell you what, when I went back with Charlie to the Chartreux, t'other night, I had a mind to say to the master, 'Teach me, sir. Here's a boy knows a deal more Latin and Greek, at 13, than I do, who am 10 years older. I have nothing to do from morning till night, and I might as well go to my books again, and see if I can repair my idleness as a boy.' Why do you laugh, Hetty?" "I laugh to fancy you at the head of a class, and called up by the master," cries Hetty. "I shouldn't be at the head of the class," Harry says, humbly. "George might be at the head of any class, but I am not a bookman, you see, and when I was young neglected myself, and was very idle. We would not let our tutors cane us much at home, but, if we had, it might have done me good." Hetty drubbed with her little foot, and looked at the young man sitting before her, strong, idle, melancholy. "Upon my word, it might do you good now," she was minded to say. "What does Tom say about the caning at school? Does his account of it set you longing for it, pray?" she asked. "His account of his school," Harry answered simply, "makes me see that I have been idle when I ought to have worked, and that I have not a genius for books, and for what am I good? Only to spend my patrimony when I come abroad, or to lounge at coffee-houses or racecourses, or to gallop behind dogs when I am at home. I am good for nothing, I am." "What, such a great, brave, strong fellow as you good for nothing?" cries Het. "I would not confess as much to any woman, if I were twice as good for nothing. What am I to do? I ask for leave to go into the army, and Madame Esmond does not answer me. 'Tis the only thing I am fit for. I have no money to buy. Having spent all my own, and so much of my brother's, I cannot and won't ask for more. If my mother would but send me to the army, you know I would jump to go." A gentleman of spirit does not want a woman to buckle his sword on for him or to clean his firelock. What was that our papa told us of the young gentleman at court yesterday, Sir John Armitage? Sir John Armitage? I used to know him when I frequented White's and the clubhouses, a fine, noble young gentleman, of a great estate in the north. And engaged to be married to a famous beauty, to Miss Howe, my Lord Howe's sister, but that, I suppose, is not an obstacle to gentlemen? An obstacle to what? Asks the gentleman. An obstacle to glory, says Miss Hetty. I think no woman of spirit would say stay, though she adored her lover ever so much, when his country said go. Sir John had volunteered for the expedition which is preparing, and being at court yesterday His Majesty asked him when he would be ready to go. "Tomorrow, please your Majesty," replies Sir John, and the king said, that was a soldier's answer. My father himself is longing to go, though he has mamma and all us brats at home. Oh dear, oh dear. Why wasn't I a man myself? Both my brothers are for the church, but, as for me, I know I should have made a famous little soldier. And, so speaking, this young person strode about the room, wearing a most courageous military aspect, and looking as bold as Joan of Arc. Harry beheld her with a tender admiration. I think, says he, I would hardly like to see a musket on that little shoulder, nor a wound on that pretty face, Hetty. Wounds. Who fears wounds, cries the little maid. Muskets? If I could carry one, I would use it. You men fancy that we women are good for nothing but to make puddings or stitch samplers. Why wasn't I a man, I say? George was reading to us yesterday out of Tasso. Look, here it is, and I thought the verses apply to me. See? Here is the book, with the mark in it where we left off. With the mark in it, says Harry dutifully. Yes. It is about a woman who was disappointed because her brother does not go to war, and she says of herself,